I was thinking maybe there's something about the word quarantine I don't get. I read in an official document here from the Victorian government, people returning from overseas are being directed to mandatory quarantine in a hotel. Well, if there's something about quarantine I don't get, I looked up the definition, Oxford definition. A period of time when an animal or a person that has or may have a disease is kept away from others in order to prevent the disease from spreading. Clearly wasn't done in Victoria. The dictionary.com definition, a strict isolation imposed to prevent the spread of the disease. What Victoria didn't meet that definition either, did it? Third option, Cambridge definition, a period of time during which an animal or person that might have a disease is kept away from other people or animals so the disease cannot spread. Fail, fail, fail. Someone doesn't even know the dictionary definition of quarantine and had this ridiculous system. Joining me is Tim Smith, Victorian Liberal frontbencher. Tim, thanks for your time. There's going to be an inquiry into how this virus got out of these quarantine hotels. What questions do you want answered?
Andrew, we don't need another investigation. We need the Gang of Eight, the 8 ministers in Victoria who are responsible for COVID coordination, to take responsibility for their bungling. And Daniel Andrews should either sack the police minister or sack the health minister or sack the jobs minister, who are responsible for this debacle that has made Victoria the laughingstock of the nation. I mean, frankly, Daniel Andrews has been letting Victorians down for the last 5 years, 6 years. He's now letting the entire country down. And someone in this government needs to take responsibility for this disaster. I mean, yeah, sure, we'll get to the bottom of the bizarrely lax approach they've taken to hotel quarantine, why they refused the offers of the Commonwealth Government for the Australian Defence Force, like occurred in New South Wales, that was have been running quarantine in New South Wales since the get-go of this crisis, why that was refused, why we had B-grade, amateur, pub-like bouncers running the show. Someone's got to take responsibility for this. I'm sure the judicial inquiry will get to the bottom of why we had such lax security at these hotels. But in the here and the now, someone in this government, someone in this shocking Labor government here in Victoria, must take responsibility for what is the greatest debacle, a public health debacle we've seen in Victoria, I think, ever.
And also, so many Victorians went through all these unnecessary restrictions that have devastated so many businesses. I mean, and you couldn't even play golf. I mean, what's the odds of getting an infection playing golf? Meanwhile, we see this clown show going on behind the scenes. I mean, it just makes a mockery of all the sacrifices Victorians have made, let alone the rest of the country. Now, we are where we are, and we've got 36 suburbs now facing a lockdown for 4 weeks. Is it necessary to lock down all those suburbs all over again?
I personally think that is excessive and unenforceable. Jeff Kennett tweeted tonight that that is excessive and unenforceable, and I completely agree with him. Frankly, the only thing the Andrews Labor government should be doing in these hotspots is making sure the people that have COVID remain in their properties or are sent to hospital but are simply kept away from everyone else that doesn't have coronavirus. I mean, that's the whole point, isn't it? We quarantine the people who are sick. We don't have guilt by association for all the other people, probably who have sacrificed a lot over recent months in these suburbs. We make sure, and we use the auspices of the state, and if that is the threat of fine, so be it, to make sure that people who are sick are kept away from everyone else who are not.
Well, when you say unenforceable, I can't imagine what people travelling through the suburb, they'll be let through. You don't know.
It's metropolitan Melbourne. It's the middle of Melbourne. How on earth are you going to make? We're going to have apparently we're going to have roadblocks in the middle of Melbourne, like Hungary in 1956. I mean, what? I mean, seriously.
I agree. You've got to go do the sensible, lock up people in quarantine, and like I've said for 3 months now, maybe more, if it takes a police car outside the door of every sick person to make sure the quarantine is observed, you do that. But this is
100%.
Just... Oh, my God. Tim Smith, just before you go, can I ask you about the ABC? Its Q&A program last night, right?
Yeah.
With all this going on, being the ABC, it attacked not the Victorian Labor government's handling the coronavirus, but it attacked the federal coalition government for not handing out enough dosh to people. Now, here is the question that the ABC's producers chose from the audience, and I want you to tell me if the face is vaguely familiar.
Much research has shown that women are the worst affected by the economic impact of the pandemic. Why is it then that your government appears to favour jobs for men in the recovery?
I'm not going to go to you first, Minister. I'm going to go to Sue Morford and then to Yasmin.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Virginia. And thank you, Marg, very much for that question. You're absolutely right.
Who is that person, Tim?
That is Marg Darcy. And Marg was the Australian Labor Party's candidate for Kooyong at the 2016 federal election and my opponent at the 2018 state election in the seat of Kew. I mean,
and Q&A, the ABC announced that last night, didn't it? They said, by the way, this question comes from a Labor Party person, just in case you're wondering why she's going for the throat of the Liberal minister rather than for the at the throat of the Victorian Labor Party. You think you would have said that, right? Oh,
well, you
think
you think ethically they ought to have, but of course they didn't.
Okay. Oh, well, that's your taxes at work, Tim. I'm glad you feel that little, you know, your wallet getting raided. You think it's all to a good cause. Thank you so much indeed for your time.
Thanks, Andrew.